My phone started vibrating long before the sound came, just a dull buzz against the nightstand, followed by the glow of a screen cutting through the dark. 3 missed calls. Then 5. Then my mother's name filling the display again and again. I remember the cold first, the way the air in my bedroom felt thin, like something was about to break. When I finally answered, her voice hit me like shrapnel, breathless, wet, panicked. Marin. Oh God, Evan's hurt. Riverbend. He needs surgery. They won't touch him without 18,000. Please, you have to. I didn't say anything at first. I just sat there, the edge of the mattress pressing into the back of my legs, the room still dark except for the small blue pulse of the screen. A part of me had known a call like this was coming. Maybe not tonight, but someday. She kept talking, words folding over each other. You're military, Marin. You know how this works. Family takes care of family. Before I could respond, a sharp metal scrape echoed from the front door, faint but unmistakable. I glanced at the phone, tapped the Ring app. The camera opened to a grainy black and white image of Wade, my ex-brother-in-law, hunched over the lock with something thin in his hand. Winter air pushed his breath into small clouds. He muttered to himself, just need her paperwork, the military stuff, it'll help the bills. That was enough. I set my mother's voice on speaker and dialed 911 with my free hand. I didn't shout. I didn't panic. I've been trained too long for that. I just reported the facts, steady and low. The police lights washed the front of my house in red and blue a few minutes later, and just as they pulled away, my phone rang again, an unfamiliar number from the base. Captain Cole, a calm voice said, "We need to discuss an urgent matter involving your military ID." I exhaled once, slow. If you've ever been the one everyone calls when things go wrong, you might understand what came next. The call from the base didn't surprise me as much as it should have. Not after hearing Wade at my door and listening to my mother's voice twist itself into panic. I sat at the kitchen counter afterward, hands wrapped around a mug I never ended up drinking from, letting the quiet settle into the house the way dust does after something breaks. And while the command center's number blinked unanswered on the screen, my mind went somewhere I hadn't visited in years, home. Salem, the place where all of this really started. I grew up in a narrow blue house on Pinecrest Road, the kind with siding that peeled a little every winter and a porch swing that never stopped creaking. My mother, Patricia, filled that house like a weather front, warm when she wanted to be, but unpredictable, always shifting. She adored my youngest brother from the moment he was born. Evan could do no wrong, not even when he did everything wrong. I remember the way she touched his cheek, gentle and almost worshipful, as if he were something rare, something breakable. She never looked at me that way. My stepfather, Gerald, came along when I was 9. A quiet man with hands always shoved into his pockets, he spent most of his life in agreement with whatever my mother wanted. He wasn't cruel, just absent, like a shadow that followed us room to room but never cast its own shape. Then there was Sarah. My sister was 2 years younger than me, sharp as glass and twice as reflective. When she discovered phone cameras in middle school, it was over. Our lives became backdrops for her. By 25, she was living almost entirely online, chasing brand deals and validation, like they were oxygen. Family for her was something that existed in captions and filtered frames. Evan didn't have the same distractions. He drifted. From job to job, couch to couch, excuse to excuse. Gambling didn't start big. It never does. First it was scratch tickets, then blackjack at the tribal casino, then online bets he placed at 2 a.m. The debt followed behind him like smoke. And somewhere along the line, around the time I enlisted at 18, my mother carved a rule into the air and expected me to breathe it. Marin is our rock. She takes care of everyone. The way she said it, you'd think it was a blessing. But it wasn't. It was weight. Quiet, familiar, and heavy enough to reshape the spine of a girl who hadn't even figured out who she was yet. I didn't know then that every sacrifice I made, every bill, every bailout, every quiet I'll handle, it wasn't gratitude to them. It was training. Training for the moment they'd come knocking, not for help but for pieces of my life they were never meant to touch. Looking back, that rule my mother carved into me, Marin takes care of everyone, didn't stay a sentence. It grew roots. By the time I left Salem for basic training, it had already wrapped itself around my ankles, and as I sat there in my kitchen after the police drove off, the quiet humming of the refrigerator was the only thing keeping me from slipping straight back into all the years I'd played along with it. It started small. It always does. A few $100s here, a bill there, the kind of emergencies families tell themselves are temporary. The first bigger hit came when Evan decided he wanted to find himself in college. I remember wiring the tuition $27,000 while sitting on the metal bunk in my barracks at Fort Jackson. The room smelled like starch and fresh-cut grass from the parade field. Evan dropped out halfway through the first semester. He told me the classes weren't vibing with him. He said it like it was a joke. I nodded like it didn't feel like a stone dropping into the center of my chest. Sarah came next. She was building some kind of online presence back then, filters, videos, little motivational quotes over sunsets she'd never actually seen. She wanted a car that matched her brand. I bought her a used SUV from a retired soldier off post, a black Chevy Tahoe, older but clean. I remember wiping dust off the hood before taking a photo to send her. She replied with a single heart emoji. She never mentioned it again. Gerald's medical bills felt different. Less selfish, more inevitable. He'd been sick on and off. I remember sitting at my kitchen table in my first duty station, spreading out the envelopes under the yellow glow of a crooked lamp. It smelled like burnt coffee and winter outside. I paid everything. It wasn't a question. It never had been. Then there were the utilities. The house back home was old, drafty. Every winter the heating bill shot up like a flare. My mother would call, voice small and tired. "They're about to shut it off, honey." I'd log into the utility portal from whatever base I was at. Sometimes Kuwait, sometimes Louisiana, sometimes a tent with sand blowing in through the seams. I'd pay it in silence, the way soldiers pay respect, straight-backed, without ceremony. My income came from places most people never see: hazard pay, deployment stipends, the quiet line items in a captain's salary that come from long nights and sandstorms and doing your job without falling apart. And all of it, every dollar seemed to flow straight back to that little blue house on Pinecrest Road. No one ever said thank you. Not once. Gratitude implied choice, and to them, my role had never been a choice at all. Just the next debt they assumed I'd keep paying until the night they decided my identity was theirs to use too. It's strange how memory works. As I sat in my kitchen that night, the hum of the fridge still steady in the background, another vibration rattled across the counter, Sarah's name lighting up the screen. I didn't pick up. I just watched it ring, my thumb resting against the cool ceramic of the untouched mug. And with that small glow in the dark kitchen, I remembered the first time I realized something about Evan's latest trip didn't add up. 2 weeks before the 3 a.m. call, I was stationed at a temporary response post outside Missoula. The air there smelled like pine and cold water, and my morning started with the crunch of frost under my boots. During a break between assessments, I sat on the tailgate of a Humvee, scrolling through the spotty Wi-Fi the way soldiers do, slowly, one bar at a time. That's when Sarah's story popped up. The first image was a lake, smooth mirror-like, with Evan grinning at the helm of a rented fishing boat. The sun behind him threw a gold ring around his shoulders. The caption said, "Riverbend Weekend." He deserves it. The next clip loaded a wide shot of a luxury suite balcony, the kind with glass railings and a fire pit built into the stone. Evan leaned back on a lounge chair, sunglasses on, drink in hand. His debt didn't look heavy at all. If anything, it looked comfortable. More posts followed. A VIP room in the casino with felt green tables and trays of chips. A Tiffany box, powder blue, opened just enough for the corner of a necklace to catch the light. A slow pan across a charcuterie board that cost more than some people's rent. I remember tightening my grip on the phone, feeling the edges press into the soft part of my palm. The wind picked up on the ridge behind me, carrying the smell of wood smoke from the temporary camp. It felt wrong watching my brother spend money that didn't belong to him, money that didn't even exist, like he was auditioning for a life he'd never earned. Then came the post that stung more than the rest. Sarah, perfectly framed in front of the resort's stone entrance, hair swept to one side, smiling like she'd rehearsed it. Her caption floated over the image in bright white letters. "It's all fine, my sister's a captain." I didn't react, not outwardly. I just let out a slow breath, the kind that's halfway between a laugh and a choke, and set the phone face down on my knee. In that moment, with snowmelt dripping off the tailgate and the mountains stretching silent beyond the tree line, I understood something I'd been avoiding for years. They weren't just leaning on me anymore. They were spending my life as if it already belonged to them. I didn't say anything to my family about those Riverbend posts. Not a word. I just carried them around the way you carry a stone in your pocket, small, cold, and heavier than you expect. But a few days after that weekend, while I was loading gear into the back of a transport truck in Montana, my phone buzzed with a message from a number I didn't recognize. The screen was bright against the midday glare. Your brother got into a fight with a dealer. He's hurt bad. The sender didn't add their name, just a blurry photo of Evan slumped against a wall, one eye swollen shut. The fluorescent casino lights above him turned his skin a pale, almost sickly color. I felt my jaw tighten a slow clench that traveled all the way up to my temples. It wasn't shock. It was the quiet confirmation of something I'd already sensed. An hour later, my mother called. Her voice came out ragged, like each word was being pushed through a narrow space. "Riverbend Medical won't touch him without $18,000 up front," she said. "This isn't pain meds, Marin. It's surgery. Bone work. If you don't help, he could lose mobility." I leaned against the side of the truck, the metal warm from the sun, and watched a patch of dust swirl across the gravel. I didn't answer right away. My breath felt heavier than the air around me. Family uses words like urgent and forever when they want you to move fast. But something wasn't right. Not the message, not her tone, not the sudden emergency. That evening, while I sat on my bunk removing my boots, my phone lit up again, this time with a live stream notification. Sarah. The preview showed her sitting in a hospital hallway, mascara smudged, one hand pressed dramatically to her mouth. The lighting was harsh yellowish, the kind that makes everything look a little tragic. When I opened the stream, her voice was already shaking for an audience of strangers. "My brother is suffering," she said, eyes glossy, turning the camera toward a closed ER door. "And my sister, Captain Marin Cole, won't even send a dime. Can you believe that, a soldier abandoning her own family?" The comments flew upward like sparks from a fire. "Heartless. Some hero she is. Disgusting." I didn't react. I just placed the phone face down on the thin gray blanket, listening to my heartbeat settle into something steady and low. Years in the Army teach you that silence is sometimes armor. By morning, Sarah had launched a GoFundMe. The title read, "Help Save Evan Since His Own Sister Won't." It didn't feel like a misunderstanding anymore. It felt like a setup, one they'd planned long before the first lie ever reached me. By the time Sarah's GoFundMe passed its first $1,000, I had already turned off every notification on my phone. Not out of anger, just a kind of quiet fatigue that settled into me the way cold settles into bones after a long field exercise. I remember sitting at the small wooden table in my quarters at Fort Carson, boots still on mud drying along the soles. The room was dim, lit only by a narrow bar of afternoon light slipping through the blinds. That was when the phone vibrated again, just once, short, sharp. A base number, one I knew not to ignore. I answered on the second ring. "Captain Cole speaking." There was a brief pause, the kind that carries weight. Then, "This is Colonel Adams. We need to discuss an urgent matter involving your identification." I straightened automatically, palm flattening against the table. The air felt different, thinner somehow. He spoke plainly the way officers do when they've already rehearsed the bad news. A photo of my military ID had been flagged during a casino investigation at Riverbend. It had been presented during a credit request, my name, my rank, my birth date. The image wasn't stolen from my wallet or my phone. It had been forwarded from someone else, from my mother. She said she thought it might help them with the bill, the colonel added. I closed my eyes for a moment, letting the silence settle. I imagined my mother holding her phone up to a lamp, angling the screen so the glare didn't hit the barcode. I could almost hear her voice, soft, coaxing, the same tone she used when asking for money. A tone I'd spent years trying not to flinch at. But that wasn't the end of it. My social security number had been used too. Traced back to a data leak the Army had notified us about last year. Evan had bought the compromised numbers online. It wasn't targeted, the colonel said gently. He purchased a batch. Yours happened to be in it. A casino credit line was opened in my name, transactions flagged, losses recorded. When he said military police are opening a case, I felt something in me go still. Not panic, just a cold tightening beneath my ribs, like the body preparing for impact. If I couldn't prove I'd been uninvolved, I could face suspension, loss of clearance, loss of benefits. Years of service rewritten by the choices of someone who'd never worn a uniform a day in his life. The colonel finished with a quiet, "I'm sorry." His voice wasn't the part that hurt. It was the fact that for the first time in my career, my future depended not on my actions, but on the betrayal of the people who shared my last name. After the call with Colonel Adams ended, I stayed at the table longer than I meant to. The blinds cast narrow stripes of light across the wood, and dust floated through them in slow, lazy spirals. My hands were flat against the surface fingertips, tingling an old stress response I'd picked up downrange. I wasn't panicking. I was cataloging, sorting facts into neat rows because that's what the Army trains you to do when the ground shifts under you. And it had shifted. Hard. The next morning, military police arrived at my office, 2 investigators, both polite in that firm military way. They spread photos and printed reports across the conference table. The room smelled faintly like coffee grounds and whiteboard markers. One investigator tapped a sheet showing a timestamp the moment my military ID was forwarded. The sender was explicitly labeled Patricia Cole. My mother. She'd sent the photo herself. She said she thought flashing a military ID might soften the hospital staff, the investigator said. His voice wasn't judgmental, just tired. The kind of tired people carry after seeing too many versions of the same mistake. Another folder revealed Sarah's part. They showed me screenshots of her live stream metrics, peaks, spikes, donation surges. She had exaggerated his injuries, added details the hospital never confirmed, and used my name as the emotional hook. Her engagement increased by almost 30% overnight, one investigator noted. The numbers were printed in red ink like warnings. I sat there quiet, tracing the edge of a photo with one finger. It felt like running a thumb over a scar, something healed over but still tender. Then came Wade. His file was thicker than the others. Apparently, he'd worked for a financial services firm before he got fired for procedural misconduct. He knew how to fabricate documents convincingly, knew how to make credit lines appear legitimate long enough to pass initial checks. The investigator slid a forged casino form toward me. My name sat at the top, typed neatly. The signature at the bottom wasn't mine, but the loop on the C was close enough to make my stomach tighten. Wade had been at my front door for a reason. He wasn't trying to help, he was covering tracks. It wasn't coordinated, the lead investigator said, closing the folder. Just a chain reaction of selfish decisions, desperation, people assuming you'd clean up the mess like you always do. That line stayed with me. Like you always do. I looked at the pile of evidence, my name twisted into shapes I didn't recognize, and felt a long, steady breath leave me. Not anger, not sorrow, just the weight of a truth I'd spent years avoiding. They hadn't betrayed me in one moment. They'd been doing it slowly, expecting I'd never notice because in their minds, I was never a daughter. I was a safety net that didn't get to break. When the investigators finally closed their folders and left the room, the quiet felt louder than their footsteps. The conference table was still covered with faint outlines where the papers had been little rectangles of disturbed dust. I stayed seated for a long time, elbows on my knees, hands clasped loosely, a posture I'd learned on deployment, the kind you settle into when you need to stay steady. The truth was out, and there was only one thing left for me to do. I handed every document, every screenshot, every forged form straight to military police. They cataloged everything with slow, methodical movements, the kind that don't rush or soften. A week later, Colonel Adams called me in. The blinds behind him cast long shadows across his uniform. He didn't drag it out. "You're cleared, Captain. Completely." I felt my shoulders lower by an inch, maybe 2. Nothing dramatic, just the body finally releasing a breath it had been holding for months. News traveled faster than I expected. Evan was ordered into a state-mandated gambling rehabilitation program, the kind with locked doors, daily schedules, and no access to phones. Sarah's GoFundMe didn't survive the week. Donors demanded transparency, and the platform froze the account pending investigation. She was required to return every dollar. And my mother... Well, the community in Salem is small. Word spreads, church whispers, grocery store stares. They felt the weight of their choices long before the legal notices ever arrived. Meanwhile, I packed my life into 4 olive green duffels and drove south. The road to Flagstaff runs wide and open with stretches where the sky feels too big for the land beneath it. I kept the windows cracked, letting the scent of dry pine and sun-baked asphalt settle around me like a blanket. I moved into a modest apartment near a veteran support center quiet building, thick walls, a balcony facing the sunrise. The first morning there, I made oats and black coffee, sitting barefoot at a small table by the window. No buzzing phone, no missed calls, no one expecting me to save anything. The silence didn't feel empty. It felt earned. Some people think cutting ties is an act of cruelty, but sometimes it's the only way to stop drowning. I didn't slam any doors. I just stopped holding them open for people who kept walking through with muddy shoes. If this story reminds you of burdens you once carried, you're welcome to share a thought below. And if you'd like to hear more true heartfelt stories like this, feel free to like and subscribe. We cannot choose the families we are born into, but we can choose the peace we protect for the rest of our lives.